Hello everyone, my name is Ansh and I am currently a grade 10 high school student. I have a great interest in prehistoric life forms and the history of life on Earth, especially the dinosaurs. Here I am going to present on the coloration of dinosaurs and some other prehistoric animals and how we determine it based on fossil evidence and the implications or what information it provides about an animal, its behavior, and its ecosystem. Lastly, I would also like to talk about how we represent the ancient past in pop culture and artwork, which affects the general image we hold of what these animals and their environment would have been like millions of years ago. So let's begin. Oh, and also before we begin talking about their life appearance, let's first get an idea of what exactly dinosaurs were, how we define dinosaurs, and how we group them together. Even if one doesn't really know about dinosaurs a lot, they would have probably seen one in some form of media, like films like Jurassic Park, or animated films like Land Before Time, or documentaries, and many toys as well. So, what exactly were these animals? Dinosaurs were a very diverse group of animals that first evolved more than 200 million years ago, back in the Triassic period. From there, they diversified and they quickly took over the planet, spreading out to virtually every single continent that there is. And they still continue to exist today in the form of birds. There's a common saying that the dinosaurs went extinct, but that's not exactly true. A single lineage did survive the mass extinction and still exists in the form of birds around us. So, dinosaurs came in all sorts of shapes and sizes. You've got the long-necked sauropods like this Diplodocus over here, some of which got absolutely huge. You've got the ceratopsians like the Triceratops, which were the ones with the fancy frills and the horns for the most part. You've got the big bipedal meat-eating theropods like the T-Rex. You've got the Stegosaurs and the Ankylosaurs and many different groups, and of course the birds that we still have with us today. And this is probably one of the main reasons why people are so interested in dinosaurs. I mean, you could never get bored with these animals. They're so interesting, and they come in so many different shapes and so many different sizes, and they're very unique. So these groups of dinosaurs have historically been classified into two major groups based on their hip structures. So there were those which were known as ornithischians, which were those which had pelvic bones shaped like those found in birds, and they included thyreophorans, which were basically the stegosaurs and the ankylosaurs, I believe. The ceratopsians and the hadrosaurs were also a part of this ornithischia clade, and many more dinosaurs were also included in this. On the other hand, you had Saurischia, which was basically the group of dinosaurs that had the pelvic bones that were shaped like those found in lizards. So these included the sauropods and the theropods, and ironically, birds themselves were among the lizard-hip dinosaurs. So that system, however, has been questioned a lot as of late, especially after the proposal of the clade Ornithocellular, which groups the ornithischians and the theropods together. But that's all great, but how do we define a dinosaur? I mean, how can I just say that a penguin is a dinosaur while a crocodile isn't? Well, let's start with Richard Owen, who was an English biologist who was the first person to coin the word dinosauria in 1841. He grouped them as a distinct group under the larger sauria. He did this based on the morphology of the pelvic bones of three dinosaurs, the Iguanodon, the Megalosaurus, and the Hylaeosaurus, which were some of the first dinosaurs discovered and described in the Western world. So based on this definition of dinosaurs, the common ancestor of these three dinosaurs and all its descendants would be classed under a clade that we call Dinosauria. So it's a scientifically sound definition that still holds up today. So we've discussed what dinosaurs are. We know about the very many shapes and sizes that they came in, but what about their colors? What would they have looked like in real life? I think that's a question many of us might have wondered about at some point, and thanks to all the information that we have gathered about these animals over the decades, we have come at least close to knowing what many of them might have looked like in real life. So let's talk about colors. Today, animals come in many different colors and patterns, and these colors may be present for a variety of different reasons. Take this tiger for example. It has a beautiful orange coloration, and it also has these black stripes all over its body. And it is suggested by some studies that this pattern is not there without any reason. The tiger hunts its prey by sneaking near it, typically in the tall grass, and the stripes help it blend in well with the grass. And the fact that many of its prey are dichromatic probably also helps, as they would perceive its orange color as green, further blending it in with the environment. And you can see in this image the tiger is hunting its prey while moving among the tall grass. And this results in the prey having a lot of difficulty in spotting the tiger, and it can get pretty close to the prey without being noticed, which is advantageous to it. So the ability of animals and plants to not be spotted by another animal has a broad term, and it is called crypsis. A common method to achieve crypsis is using camouflage, which involves blending in with your environment. And the most prevalent way to do this is being colored like your environment. So as you can see over here, these are some animals which utilize camouflage. Take this polar bear for example. It has white fur so that it can blend in with the snow in the Arctic to sneak up on its prey. So I think the polar bear preys upon animals like seals, and with this white fur on its body, it can get pretty close to these animals without being noticed by them. Next, there is also this great white shark. Notice how the top of the shark is dark while the bottom of the shark is lighter. This is because of a pattern that is known as countershade. So a countershaded pattern is basically dark at the top and light at the bottom. This is because light from the sun hits the animal from the top, at the top, illuminating the dark part while the bottom stays in shadow. This creates a uniform shade all across the animal's body and makes it harder for other animals to spot it. This is very important for both predators and prey, and this is the reason why such a pattern is very common in the animal kingdom. And here are some other examples of camouflaged animals. Here's the mossy leaf-tailed gecko, which looks like the tree trunk over here, and here's the chameleon, and here's an eastern screech owl. So all these animals are colored like their environment, and they utilize their color to blend in with their environment so that other animals have a lot of difficulty in spotting them. Now we will talk about advertising and animals, the biologic kind of advertising. So basically what advertising means, it is basically an animal that wants to basically be seen by other animals. So not all animals want to stay hidden. And to do this, they take advantage of various display structures and again coloration. But why do they want other animals to see them? Well, there are a variety of reasons, and we are going to take a look at them. Before we move on to the next slide, here's a quick spider warning because in case some of you may be arachnophobic. So if that's clear, we may continue now. So here we'll talk about the use of coloration in sexual selection. Many animals are sexually dimorphic, meaning that different sexes have different features and appearances, many times for display to be more appealing to the other sex so that they can mate. Take a look at this peacock spider, for example. Males of this species have these mesmerizing scissoring patterns on their backs, and they use this as a courtship display. They also perform ritualized movements, and based on their patterns and performance, a female may either decide to copulate or reject the spider. There are also many birds who use display to attract mates. Like in peafowl, the male peafowl, also known as a peacock, has this beautiful tail of feathers with eye spot-like patterns all over them, and they use this as a courtship display. And many of these greater birds of paradises also have this beautiful yellow plumage in male birds, and they again use it as a display during their courtship dances when they show them off to the other sex. But there are also some animals that are strikingly colored to threaten other animals, to warn them that they are dangerous and that it would be a very bad idea to bother them. This is known as aposematism. A good example of aposematism are poison dart frogs, as they are shown here. Many of these frogs are very poisonous, and they have very toxic poison in their skin, and this is their natural defense against predators. So these poisonous frogs are brightly colored, and this coloration, the brightness of this coloration, is directly correlated with their toxicity. So this is one way to warn other animals that they are not to be messed with. Alright, so we have so far looked at how coloration is important to an animal. Knowing an animal's coloration may not only provide us information about that animal, but it may also tell us about its behavior, lifestyle, environment, and even other animals it routinely interacts with. Now, let's talk about the past. No, not the dinosaurs yet, but a fossil squid relative. So this is the story of a cephalopod. And I know we have been going on a lot about every animal except the dinosaurs in a presentation mainly about dinosaurs, but we are getting to them just after this really interesting little story. So in 2006, paleontologist Jacob Winter was examining a well-preserved fossil of a prehistoric cephalopod. So well preserved even that even the ink sacs had fossilized and preserved the ink. So he zoomed into this ink using an electron microscope. It was fossilized ink, of course, and he saw many of these tiny translucent balls. And he wondered what these could be. And these balls were actually previously discovered by other paleontologists before him, and they theorized that these could be fossilized bacteria, for instance. But to Winter, these looked like something else. They were exactly like the granules of melanin pigment that color the ink of modern squid and octopi. So he compared these structures to the melanin found in the ink sacs of modern cuttlefish shown over here. It wasn't long until he realized that he had found the evidence that melanin can be preserved in fossilized material. Now, many of you might already know what melanin is, but to those who don't, melanin, or these certain types of melanin, are basically pigments that give animals their colors, including us humans. So you have your skin color thanks to the melanin present on your skin. Melanin are produced by cells known as melanocytes. These cells produce organelles called melanosomes, and inside these melanosomes, melanin is synthesized and stored. In general, there are 5 basic types of melanin, namely the eumelanin, the pheomelanin, the allomelanin, the neuromelanin, and the pyomelanin. Of these 5, we are going to mainly be taking a look at 2, the eumelanin and the pheomelanin. The eumelanin is a common type of melanin, in fact the most common I believe, and it can be further divided into 2 categories, the black and the brown eumelanin. And as you may have guessed by those names, it plays a big role in black and brown coloration. The pheomelanin, on the other hand, contains polybenzothiazide, which is a heterocyclic compound which is largely responsible for a red, brown, and yellow coloration. So if you have red hair, you have pheomelanin to thank for them. So these melanin are found in the particular type of melanosomes. Eumelanin is found in eumelanosomes, as you can see over here, and pheomelanin are found in pheomelanosomes, and they differ by shapes. As you can see, the eumelanosomes are more elongated. They curve at the ends and they are shaped like tiny cigars, we can say. The pheomelanin are more spherical, more oval in shape. And this distinction is important as it helps in telling what kind of melanin you're dealing with, and essentially what coloration would be present due to the melanosomes you're observing, though you might also need to consider the animal you're dealing with, as we'll see in a while. So we humans have melanin, prehistoric squid relatives had melanin. You know what else had melanin? That's right, dinosaurs. Yes, we finally got to the dinosaurs. So these guys, as we had talked about before, were a very diverse group of animals that lived on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. And they started to take over back in the Triassic period after the Permian mass extinction, so over here. And most of these guys went extinct by the end of the Cretaceous period, so over here. So about 66 million years ago, not 65 mind you, that estimate is outdated now. So someday about 66 million years ago, a very big, roughly about 10 kilometers wide comet or an asteroid crashed into the planet in the Gulf of Mexico, and the resultant chaos killed off the last non-avian dinosaurs. Non-avian here basically means all the dinosaurs except the birds, because birds were the only ones who survived to this day. So all that remains of the non-avian dinosaurs is fossilized material in the form of rock. And here are some good examples of some of these fossils. So this is a T-Rex specimen. These are some Spinosaurus holotype, and this is a specimen of a Triceratops. So while in most cases the bones are the only structures that fossilize because they are very durable, more durable than most other body parts, in some rare cases other body parts can also fossilize. Sometimes even soft organs can preserve as fossils in very rare cases, as seen in some Mosasaurs specimens. But here we are only interested in fossils of Integuments. As you can see here on this slide, Integuments in this context mean basically the skin, scales, and feathers, and all the stuff that is on the outside of an animal, all the stuff on which melanin is present and displayed. So here are some of the integuments seen in extant animals. Here's the skin, here's the scales, and here are the feathers. And here are some integuments that we know from extinct animals. So here is a fossilized feather, and here is some fossilized T-Rex skin. One of these where particularly well-preserved fossils are found is China. because of the type of environment many of its Mesozoic formations had, and thus begins the story of how we first found the coloration of a non-avian dinosaur. So, China offers some very well preserved dinosaur specimens, especially of small feathered dinosaurs, and one such dinosaur was Sinosauropteryx prima, which was described in 1996. It was actually the first dinosaur apart from birds and their very close relatives that was discovered with evidence of simple filament like feathers. As you can see on this image, there's some fluff around the specimen of this Sinosauropteryx, around the tail, around the back of the animal. So those are impressions of the feathers that this animal had. So Sinosauropteryx was a compsognathid dinosaur from the Jehol Formation, a small one only about 1 meter in length. It had short arms, as you can see over here in the image, and it had an unusually long tail. And as you can notice, there are bands of patterns on the tail alternating between dark and light, and this will be important later on when we talk about this animal in detail. This was originally assumed to be a result of the splitting of the rock inside which the specimen was located. However, in 2002, paleontologist Nick Longridge made a presentation and formed a compelling argument that these patterns were too evenly distributed to be a result of the random separation of the fossil slabs. Instead, he believed that these represented the color patterns that the animal would have exhibited in life. This argument was highly supported by a paper that came out in 2010, written by a team of Chinese and British paleontologists. So basically, the paleontologists took a look at 4 specimens. So one of them was this isolated pennaceous feather. We don't really know what dinosaur it belonged to as far as I'm aware. And if you're wondering what a pennaceous feather is, they're basically feathers which have their vein or the stalk in the middle that gives them a proper structure. And as you can see in this image, there is a vein that goes in the middle of this feather. In contrast, down feathers found in many of the water birds that we see today are more fuzzy and chaotic, and they lack this vein that gives them a structure. The other 3 specimens that the study looked at were fossils of known dinosaurs, namely the Sinosauropteryx, the Confuciusomnis, and the Sinornithosaurus. Let's take a look at all these specimens one after another. So first off, the isolated pennaceous feather. A pennaceous feather is basically a feather that has a vein or a stalk in the middle, as we have discussed before. Structurally, they are similar to the contour feathers found in modern day birds. Learning about these feathers is essential to understand the evolution of feathers in dinosaurs. We know that many of the non-avian dinosaurs possess feathers as well, but it's debated what they exactly use these feathers for, because they couldn't fly, so they wouldn't evolve these feathers for just flight. Maybe they use them to retain heat, or maybe for display. But anyways, they took a look at this feather. I don't think we know exactly what dinosaur it belonged to. The study didn't mention that, and I couldn't really find any information on that either, so I'll go with that assumption. So they looked at it using the scanning electron microscope, and they observed these tiny objects. They're hard to see in the images, but they observed these tiny spherical objects, and they look like the structures that Winter earlier saw in the ink sacs of the cephalopod, and they realized that what they're looking at was fossilized melanosomes. You can see them kind of. They're really tiny, the arrow points to them, but they're very small, so they are difficult to see here. But the type of melanosomes that I found on the feathers were eumelanosomes. So those were the elongated cigar-shaped ones. But we don't really know what what dinosaur this feather belonged to. So let's move on to the next dinosaur they took a look at, which was the Sinosauropteryx prima, which was a small compsognathid dinosaur from the Jehol biota of China. And they took the specimen, this one over here, a part of it, and looked at it, the fuzz, under a scanning electron microscope again. And at that time, some other paleontologists had doubted that these filamentous, the fuzz that you can see here was filamentous feathers. Instead, they suggested that these were collagen fiber found in the dermis. So they looked at it under the electron microscope. Again, they found these melanosomes. As you can see on this screen, the image, there are many tiny spherical bodies, and these are basically melanosomes. They didn't find any eumelanosomes this time. Instead, they saw that the specimen only contained phaeomelanosomes. So these were the melanosomes that give red, brown, or yellow coloration. So this refuted the claims about the dermal collagen fibers, and this confirmed that these really were filamentous feathers. Because as feathers start to grow in dinosaurs, they don't initially possess the melanin. The melanin is present on the epidermis, and from there it migrates to the growing feather. And the melanosomes found on this specimen were evident of this. Another way to confirm that these were feathers and that they were looking at actual melanosomes rather than, say, some fossilized bacteria was that these melanosomes were compared to those found in modern day birds. Birds have them arranged in complex arrays on their feathers, and the melanosomes found on the furs of Sinosauropteryx matched that to a good extent. But not only that, Sinosauropteryx also became the first non-avian dinosaur that we discovered the coloration of, based on the presence of phaeomelanosomes, the elongated ones that gave a yellow, red, or brown coloration, and comparisons with modern day birds. The study determined that Sinosauropteryx would have had a chestnut brown color, or we can say it had a ginger color across this body. It was also counter-shaded, as we can see in this figure over here. It was darker at the top and lighter at the bottom. As we have seen that this pattern is very common in animals to blend in with the environment, blend in their body colors so that they don't appear as a 3D object to other animals. And also a very remarkable thing is that it had these banded stripes on its tail. So as you can see here in the specimen, there are bands of alternating colors. So these were striped patterns on its tail. So it's sort of like the stripes found on a red panda, except the stripes this time were pale, as you can see in this beautiful reconstruction by paleoartist Julio Lacerda over here. Sinosauropteryx already had an unusually long tail, and the presence of these banded feathers indicates that this pattern held some importance. It could have been a display structure to show off to their mate, or maybe it helped with camouflage, or maybe a bit of both. But that's all. The study also looked at other dinosaurs as well. Confuciusomnis sanctus was a small avian dinosaur from the Confuciusornithid family. The study didn't talk much about the exact coloration of either Confuciusomnis or Sinornithosaurus, as we'll see after this, but it did talk about the patterns that Confuciusomnis might have had. They found the presence of both eumelanin and phaeomelanin, which may indicate a hued coloration with black, white, and brown, and comparisons have been made to modern day zebra finches. However, a study a year after the 2010 paper doubted these results, and based on the melanosomes that were found that they found on the specimen, along with the presence of metals like copper, they suggested that the wings might have had been white, while the long tail feathers, as you can see in this reconstruction, might have been all black. Recent studies have suggested that Confuciusomnis also had heavy spots on its body, especially around the throat and the crest. And then there is the last dinosaur the 2010 study looked at, which was the Sinornithosaurus millenii. It was a small dromaeosaur dinosaur related to dinosaurs like the Velociraptor. Again, the study didn't really talk much about its life coloration, but it did mention what kind of melanosomes the filaments had on these animals. The filaments either possessed eumelanosomes or phaeomelanosomes, not a mix of the two. This indicates significantly differing color tones all across the body, perhaps something like what is shown in this beautiful artwork that is shown over here. And soon after this study, many more studies came out that started to determine the coloration of dinosaurs using this method. The same year, in 2010, another paper came out written by many authors, including Winter himself, and this time it talked about the coloration of a small Parabian dinosaur, which was known as an Anchiomis huxleyi. They used the same methods as the previous study, and they found the presence of both eumelanin and phaeomelanin, and based on the shape and density of these melanosomes and comparisons with extant birds, they determined that Anchiomis would have had a gray and dark body. But what is interesting to note here is that they found that the crest of this dinosaur had a reddish brown color, and it also had rufous speckled feathers on its face, as you can see here. Many modern birds also have brightly colored crests, be it for sexual display or communication. So it is very likely that the reddish brown crest on Anchiomis was a display structure which might have been used to signal mates. Then we have the Microraptor, whose coloration was inferred in a study that came out in 2012. I think some of you may be familiar with this one. Microraptor is among the more popular dinosaurs out there, a small four-winged dromaeosaurid. The study again applied the same methods to this specimen over here that were used for the previous dinosaur that we looked at. And as you can see in this figure, they compared the melanosomes to many of the feathers found in extant birds. And Microraptor, based on the feathers of extant birds, they found similarities with the black coloration found in the feathers of many birds today. So based on this, Microraptor was most likely black in color like a raven, or at least on the parts that were considered in this study. But the most interesting thing about this guy was that it was also iridescent, and iridescence in animals is not caused by pigments like melanin for the most part. It is rather caused by structural coloration, a complex arrangement of microstructures in the plumage may deflect light in such a way that it appears in different colors from different angles. Iridescent plumage is found in many modern-day birds and is used mostly for signaling and display. The tail feathers in Microraptors had been theorized before to serve a display purpose, but with the evidence of iridescence in the plumage, it is likely that the plumage had significance in display. This says a lot about why feathers could have evolved in dinosaurs, as we have talked about earlier, and the evolution of iridescence in feathers itself. So from an evolutionary viewpoint, this was a pretty significant discovery. And now we'll talk about the Archaeopteryx. This is another popular dinosaur, often talked about as an evolutionary link between non-avian dinosaurs and birds. So this guy was an avian. In 2012 again, another study came out that described the coloration of this one. Well, not really the full coloration. You see, as you can see in this figure over here, The study took a specimen of an isolated feather and applied the methods to it to find out its coloration, and they determined that the feather was black in color. But this is just one feather. So while we can say that with some certainty that Archaeopteryx was black in color in at least some parts of its body, it would be a rather hasty decision to say that was all black all over the body. Maybe it was colored different in other parts of the body. We can't really tell what its entire body looked like with just one feather. So while we don't know what it really looked like in life, we do know that at least some parts of it were most likely black in color, and there's still some space for artistic liberty when reconstructing this animal. And this may also apply to some other dinosaurs on this list. While we do have a good enough idea about the life coloration of some dinosaurs like the Sinosauropteryx or the Anchiomis, it is important to note that some other dinosaurs had only some certain parts of them studied, and therefore we can't really apply that coloration to the whole body, as a uniform color, especially in smaller animals, is not very common. I will talk about this in more detail in a while discussing the problems with this method, but for now, dinosaurs. Moving on to our last theropod dinosaur on this list, Kaihongjuji was yet another small Peruvian dinosaur from the Anchionithid family. A rather recent study from the 2018 talked about its coloration. So this dinosaur had very long feathers. It was covered with feathers and would have probably been super fluffy. So the researchers identified some black coloration on most of the body, applying the same methods that we have seen before, along with iridescence. So this is another example of iridescence in non-avian dinosaurs. The head, chest, and the underside of the tail were the only brightly colored areas of this animal and would have looked rather beautiful with the iridescence. This iridescent plumage again comes with the help of complex nanostructures found in the feathers and could have very well served the purpose of display. Alright, so far we have looked at the theropod dinosaurs, and we have only talked about small dinosaurs like birds, so some of you might have gotten a little bored with them. But now we are going to take a look at something different. We will see examples of melanosomes present on the skins and scales, not the plumage of an animal. So here is one of my favorite dinosaurs. So this one is named Borealopelta markmitchellii. The holotype is an exceptionally well preserved specimen, as you can see over here. And there are many osteoderms that are present on it, along with skin of this animal and some organs, I believe, as well. And also it preserves the fossilized melanosomes. So in 2017, a paper came out that looked into the melanosomes present on the holotype and revealed that this dinosaur was rusty reddish brown in life, as you can see on this beautiful restoration over here. And the interesting thing to note here is that the animal was counter-shaded. Borealopelta was not the largest ankylosaurian, but it was not a small dinosaur either. It was around 5.5 meters in length. And when you look at large animals today, like elephants or rhinoceros, they don't really have any counter-shaded patterns. For example, elephants, for one, have a uniform gray coloration all over the body. And that's because they don't really need any counter-shade. There's virtually no animal that would naturally hunt a fully grown elephant or a rhino today. However, back in the time of Borealopelta, many large predatory dinosaurs roamed in many different places, and the counter-shaded pattern on this animal suggests that it was hunted by predators actively, and thus the coloration of this animal would help camouflage it well with its environment. So it probably lived in environment that had a lot of low growing fawns and a foresty area, and this counter shaded pattern would help it camouflage well against larger predators. The next dinosaur we are going to take a look at also utilized camouflage and had counter shaded patterns as well. The Psittacosaurus, a small ceratopsian dinosaur. So a study in 2016 took a look at this specimen of a Psittacosaurus and once again looked at the pigmentation preserved on the fossilized skin in the specimen. They found out that the Psittacosaurus was counter shaded and had a much darker coloration on the top than at the bottom. And they used this pattern and built this beautiful life model over here, and basically they applied different lightings to it and determined what kind of environment this animal lived in. And based on what they found out, the pattern is works most efficiently with a closed environment like a dense forest. So this animal most likely lived in a very dense forested area. So this is yet again another example of the coloration and patterns on a dinosaur, helping us understand not only about the animal itself but its environment as well. So we are almost done here with the dinosaurs for now. But before we move on, let's take a quick view at some of the interesting things that relate to the life appearance of some dinosaurs. So here we can see that let's talk about the Tyrannosaurs. Some of you may be thinking we have talked about so many dinosaurs by now, but we haven't even talked about the Tyrannosaurus yet. What color was that? And the simple answer is that we don't know yet. We do have preserved scales of not just the T-Rex, but also many other genera of Tyrannosaurs, as you can see over here. But no one has really looked at them with respect to pigmentation yet. Personally, I have talked with both Dr. Phil Bell and Dr. Mike Benton on this matter, and the reason that why no one has looked into it is most likely a funding issue. It would be rather difficult to get anyone to fund research into something so risky, but the specimens are out there, and there is a possibility that they may have melanosomes preserved well enough to determine the coloration. We might just need to wait for this one. Next we have the mummified dinosaurs. Yes, mummified. For instance, this mummy of an Edmontosaurus doesn't really preserve impressions on the skin. It preserves actual skin itself, and there has been a study to look for melanosomes in it. I haven't really fully read the paper yet, but from what I know of it, it seems that they didn't really find any good evidence to determine the coloration of the animal, which is a shame, but they did find patterns for the arrangement of scales. But the thing is that the patterns of scales don't really necessarily correlate with coloration, but it's still a very cool specimen with all what it preserves. So let's finally leave the dinosaurs behind, and for now at least, and head over to other animals. In 2014, a paper came out that described the coloration of 3 disparate groups of prehistoric animals. So basically a mosasaur, an ichthyosaur, and a prehistoric leatherback turtle. So they took a look at these 3 specimens shown over here of them respectively. Well, not respectively, I guess I think this is from the mosasaur, but yeah, these are the 3 specimens of these 3 animals they took a look at, and basically they found black pigmentation in their skin. The mosasaur and the leatherback turtle had a counter-shaded pattern as seen in modern day animals like great white sharks. This pattern is very helpful for hunting prey in the shallow waters. The ichthyosaur, however, that they looked at was uniformly black, as you can see in this image, much like the sperm whales of today. This may have been because some ichthyosaurs hunted in deeper waters where the sunlight wouldn't be able to penetrate, and thus a counter-shaded pattern wouldn't have been useful for them. A uniform black coloration would have helped them in thermoregulation as well. And as you can see them all in this brilliantly illustrated reconstruction of the three animals over here, their coloration. Now finally let's talk about the oldest instance of color that we know of in the fossil record, going all the way back to the Cambrian period around 500,000,000 years ago. Life was very alien back then. Strange creatures roamed those ancient seas. Among them were these three little critters, the soft bodies Vivaxia, the worm Canadia, and the arthropod Marella. These animals are known from the Burgess Shale of North America. They had very hard protective external structures on their body, as you can see over here. In 1998, zoologist Andrew Parker reported on the coloration of these structures and found out that they would have been iridescent due to the way they diffracted light. This was interesting because it raised the question, why would any animal from the Cambrian period need iridescent coloring on its body? The thing to note here is that the iridescence is on the protective parts of these animals. The Cambrian period saw the Cambrian explosion, of course, in which the organisms grew rapidly and started taking some unusual but somewhat familiar shapes. One of the important things that first came out in this period in Metazoan animals were eyes, and they were rapidly evolving. For the first time, these animals could see their surroundings and other animals around them. And with the rise of the first predatory animals like the Anomalocaris that fed on animals like Vivaxia, Marella, and Canadia, as are shown here, it is possible that the latter three evolved iridescence as a form of warning to these predators. This indicates that light, colors, and the evolution of the eyes played an important role in the Cambrian explosion, and this formed the basis of the light switch theory that Parker himself subsequently formed and presented in his books. So far, we have talked about some examples of coloration in dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals. But are they accurate? Well, it depends. The methods that we have discussed here does come with certain problems, and many people have rightfully been skeptical about it when it first came out and the first heard about it. So let's look at some of the problems that are involved with this method. There are two ways to be skeptical about this. One is the narrative that we are observing. What we are observing here are not actual melanosomes, or are melanosomes but don't really come from the animal itself. The other narrative is that these structures are melanosomes and are from the animal itself, but they don't always show the real coloration the animal would have had. Let's consider both of these arguments one by one. So, how do we know that these tiny round structures are melanosomes? They are around the same size as keratinophilic bacteria. The 2010 study ruled out the possibility of these structures being bacteria on the basis that 1. These structures were region specific, meaning that in some areas you would find many of them, while in others you won't find any. If it were bacteria, their presence would have more than likely been ubiquitous along the specimen. Take the Borealopelta for instance. While in the skin, the content of the structures is very high, in the shoulder spines, the content is very low. Secondly, the comparisons with modern day birds clearly show a great similarity. In both of these, the structures are arranged in complex arrays. Also worth noting is the fact that these structures were preserved organically, as evident by carbon content. So that rules out the possibility of them being diagenetic in nature. Another interesting argument that I've seen as of late is the possibility that the melanosomes actually came from algae after the animal died, as we know that algae and fungi can produce melanosomes. However, if that was the case, it is very unlikely that the melanosomes would be such region specific. Instead, they would have been expected to be preserved randomly over the specimen. Now, let's consider the other main argument that goes that these are real melanosomes from the animal, but don't really portray the life coloration of these animals. I think this argument holds more merit than the first one, as we have seen, as we know that many animals that are alive today have their coloration depending on what they eat. Let me explain how this works. So many of the reptiles, birds and mammals are not really able to produce a variety of color most of the time. Instead, for example, they are mostly simply black, gray, brown or red. These are the colors that they get from the two melanosomes that we have talked about. However, as you can see in these images, and the flamingo is a great example of this, they can get carotenoid pigments from the food that they eat. The flamingos, for instance, are pink. I mean, they appear pink, they are not inherently pink because of the intake of red algae. They don't directly eat it. The red algae is first eaten by shrimps, and the shrimps are then eaten by the flamingos. Now, what exactly are carotenoids? Basically, these are pigments that are colored from yellow to orange to red and are produced by plants, fungi, algae, and some bacteria. Some animals can intake these pigments in the food that they eat and acquire new coloration. This could be the case with some of the dinosaurs we have discussed here, especially the smaller ones. Carotenoids are the second most common pigments found in birds that are responsible for coloration in their feathers after melanin. However, as sound as this argument is, it is worth noting that carotenoids are much more common in panaceous feathers than in plumulaceous feathers, and melanin pigments are still much more common than them. A study from 2014 seeking carotenoid pigments in amber fossils failed to find any using the Raman spectroscopy. The two possible reasons they put forward for this was: one, the carotenoids were destroyed by diagenetic processes, and two, that the feathers they looked at did not have any carotenoid pigment at all, with the latter being more likely. So in the end, the accuracy of this method really depends more on what kind of dinosaur you're talking about. Some of them we can be quite certain that we know their coloration. Some of them we can be almost certain that we know their coloration, but only on some parts of the body. And then again, some of them we can't really be fully sure about. Okay, so we have talked about a lot about how the prehistoric animals were likely colored like and what it tells us about their environment, behavior, lifestyle, and many more things. But what exactly are the implications of this? How does this change anything? Let's talk about Paleoart. Now, Paleoart is a rather vague term in and of itself, but here we will use it to refer to the practice of portraying the past in the works of art. Paleoart is important because it not only reflects the general views on the past of the particular time, but it also affects the image of the past in the eyes of the common people. The history of Paleoart goes back centuries. Ever since the first dinosaurs were described in the first years of Paleoart, we can see that people back then didn't really have a good idea of what the bones of dinosaurs really were. They were unlike the bones of animals that are alive today in the sense that some of them were huge. So in the early works of Paleoart, you can see them being portrayed in a strange, brutish fashion, as you can see here in The Country of the Iguanodon by John Martin. Then later on, dinosaurs were seen as giant lizards, and they were depicted as such: slow, sluggish, scaly, standing upright, and dragging their tails. A major turning point in how we describe dinosaurs came with the discovery of Deinonychus, which was a small and slender-built dinosaur from the Dromaeosaurid family, group of dinosaurs that definitely looked like it ran fast to chase its prey. The image of a slow, sluggish dinosaur was then challenged, and it wasn't long until it was portrayed in artwork the dinosaurs that were more active and more lively. And then we arrived at feathers. Years and years later, we changed our views based on new discoveries. In the modern times, paleoart has gone from portraying a singular view of these animals to exploring a multitude of possibilities. Many modern paleoartists are much more open to many ideas and love their creative liberty to create intriguing pieces of artwork that showcase the different ways the past could have looked like. The discovery of dinosaur coloration, while has great implications for the science itself, has some implications on paleoart as well. It gives us a view of these creatures from the outside and brings us nearer to the understanding that of what they really might have looked like. But as with most things in paleontology, there are hardly any objectives here, as we have seen in the problem section. So here there is still a big room for speculation for paleoartists while depicting these animals. But as we go on and study them more and make more discoveries, we only come nearer and nearer to finding out what our planet really looked like once upon a time. Okay, so that was a long presentation. Let's quickly summarize all the points that I went over in this presentation. We have talked about what dinosaurs were. We have talked about the importance of colors. We have talked about the major pigments that are responsible for coloration, the melanin, the eumelanin and the pheomelanin. We have talked about the color of some dinosaurs and of some other prehistoric animals. We have talked about the problems that come with this method to not be prone to any bias and consider other arguments and viewpoints. And we have talked about the implication of paleoart, the implications of coloration in paleoart, as well as a very brief history of paleoart itself. Okay, so this has been a very fun project for me to do, and it is the first time I made such a long presentation on anything, but I think it's fair for a topic I like a lot. If there were any flaws in the slides or if my voice wasn't good, feel free to inform me and share your thoughts with me. If you want the sources for anything that I've talked about here, you can DM me on Discord or ask me on the server. You can also feel free to ask any questions that you have. Lastly, I would also like to give a big thanks to the Biocord Discord server and its staff for providing me an opportunity to speak on this topic. It's been a great experience working with you all and making this presentation. So thanks a lot. So ending this presentation here. Thank you for listening, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.